Welcome to Prime Suspects. Alongside Adam Bjorn and Prime Sports co-founder Joe Brennan Jr., I'm your host, Matt Landis. Adam, let's kick it off as we always do. How were NFL Week 15 results and anything else noteworthy from this past week in the world of sports for Prime Sports and Betcris?
It was actually a pretty good week going into Sunday, and then completely hit the bed. New England, biggest game of the day, up 21-0, get beat. The morning games were horrific. The later games helped a little bit, but then Minnesota, all the money was coming for them late as well. So it was, in the end, an okay week, but it could have been a really good one, even if we'd held our own on Sunday. But the NFL early games and then that night game just didn't help at all.
All right, well, not to get political, but let's shift gears to the other, and some may say original sport known as football. On December 6th, we had the MLS final, which saw Lionel Messi and Inter Miami defeat Vancouver, draw the highest viewership in 3 years per Sportico. And Adam, I'm curious, with MLS season now in the books, what you can share about action you took this season, including any potential correlation between growth in TV ratings and growth in handle.
I mean, we're seeing a little bit of growth on the Prime Sports side on the soccer. MLS has been a top 3 or 4 league for the last 5 or 6 years for Betcris in Latin America. And, we've all sort of been thinking that next year's where soccer might get a little bit of a juiced boost with the World Cup and whatnot coming. But no, it's still overall, they haven't gravitated to it like the other sports. It's still a, distance down the road kind of sport. MLS, though, in the soccer world, when you go across the board, it is a, usually third or fourth volume-wise in the weeks, each week kind of thing of the little volume that there is.
All right, well then let's pivot back to the NFL as our bread and butter and bring you into the fold, Joe. The Rams and Broncos have become the first 2 teams to punch their tickets to the playoffs, while Chiefs Kingdom has seen its reign come to an end, at least for now, as the Chargers' victory yesterday in Kansas City eliminated the Chiefs from contention. What are you watching for most closely as the playoff hunt intensifies down the home stretch of the regular season?
So it's interesting to see how the futures markets are starting to gel, both with, we're really late in the season, so it's interesting to look at to make the playoff markets, and then, of course, the Super Bowl winner market. What I really find interesting right now is, you had Green Bay lost again yesterday to the Broncos, and Chicago won, and then heading into this week's game in Chicago between Green Bay and the Bears. Right now, the Bears are favored in that one. But when you look at the futures markets, just to make the playoff markets, there's not a whole lot of faith that bettors seem to have when it comes to looking at to make the playoffs. Like looking at the markets over on FanDuel to make the playoffs, like Green Bay, they're listing at minus 1150, and then they have Chicago at minus 370. So not a whole lot of faith there, at least from bettors right now in the monsters of the Midway. It is also really interesting to see in the NFL futures that even though the Los Angeles Rams, they're getting the lion's share of the money here right now. They had a very middle of the pack schedule strength-wise, but you look at a team like Buffalo, I think Buffalo and Philadelphia both have the look of teams that kind of knew from the beginning of the season, like the way things line up, we know we're going to the playoffs, and they just both teams seem to have this habit of only playing one half of football. And I think I've especially seen that on display now with Buffalo 2 weeks in a row. It is just taking years off the life of our beloved lawyer, Jeff Ifrah, over there. The biggest Buffalo fan that we know. But it is interesting to see that some of the teams, especially that the media is falling in love with, like how many times during that Patriots-Bills game yesterday, they have to say like, oh, May is an MVP candidate. Well, there's not a whole lot of faith right now. The Patriots aren't even in the top 5 right now when it comes to, they're all the way down to like 8th, 9th. Some of these kind of nouveau winning teams, whether it's the Jaguars or the Patriots, and even the Broncos. I'm kind of surprised. Broncos have had a solid season. I have a bit more respect for them because they really punched Philadelphia in the mouth. But when you look at the money coming in on them, they're still only the number 4 or number 5 team when it comes to Super Bowl futures. So not a whole lot of respect, I think, being paid to current, regular season win-loss records. And there still seems to be an awful lot of people who are hanging on to preseason favorites like the Packers, the Eagles, and the Bills to do something here, at least looking at those futures markets.
And Adam, as Joe talks about preseason anchors we may have and how we look at teams, I'd be curious to zoom in on the Packers just a bit, because it seems like as we record this, there are fears that Micah Parsons tore his ACL yesterday. And looking at their game against Chicago, 1.5 point favorite, it looks like the line Planetech opened with a scene, maybe a nibble on the Bears. Correct me if I'm wrong there, but nothing substantial. I would gather that a player of Parsons' caliber may be worth, 1.5 points to the spread in a given game. Curious for your thoughts as to how that type of injury for a team that was so popular heading into the season might affect the outlook for the Packers this week, but also, as Joe touched on, looking at the futures market, what impact that may have on the Packers' odds from your viewpoint of winning the NFC or potentially making a Super Bowl run.
Well, just to jump into that, the last segment a little early today, the Bears, and I was just going through the charts, they're a 1.5 point dog, and that's been all the money. And they've been the most money of the week on any team was the Bears +2, +1.5. So obviously people think that the market hasn't reacted enough to what that line is. And again, the way the Bears have been showing up, it's a bit like last week's game. It just felt like Denver should have been favourite at home. The Packers doesn't seem like any different should be here, especially with that injury. So I think the betting so far has really shown that people are thinking that this is a bigger impact than what the odds makers have right now.
And when it comes to your own risk management purview, lining an opener for Bears Packers with that injury news, managing futures risk, do you take that into account proactively, or is that much more reactive to what the market tells you and adjusting accordingly as quickly as you see action that you respect?
Well, really, again, it depends on who's coming in and which side. I mean, you could have 100,000 on the Bears and it's all square money, and then a couple of thousand the other way, and that'll hold up the number, even though it's a lot less money on the game. On the future side of it, a lot of it now is sort of working out what's the seeding positions, what's the all up, to win each of those games, things like that. And also the position. I mean, the reason the Bills are still so short, yes, they just need to warm up and make it, and they'll be competitive. But I mean, our exposure is excessive on the Bills from before the season. So there's no point pushing them out right now, especially after, as bad as it sort of looked the last few weeks, down 21-0, New England Patriots kind of burst their bubble a little bit, and the MVP and all these kind of things of having them locked in. But you look at it as well, they'd won 9 in a row, up 21-0, seemingly just took the foot off the gas and then just got run over the top of. So there's a lot of ways to look at it. Definitely at this point in time, your liquidity sort of is dominating a little bit on where you are and what you're positioning on that sense. And people are there bet the same way as they have most of the season. Like generally there's just teams that you could have excessively good odds that the wise guys are picking off, bits and pieces, but everyone else is just betting the same teams. I mean, even up until a few weeks ago, they were still sort of looking at Kansas City. Oh, they'll turn it around, like the playoff odds and stuff like that. It's just the nature of the beast.
All right, well, one team we didn't touch on in our NFL deep dive was the Arizona Cardinals. Probably no surprise, as they don't have a playoff berth on the horizon, but that hasn't kept their state out of the sports betting news cycle, with Arizona becoming the first U.S. jurisdiction to banish a licensed operator in the form of Underdog for its broader involvement in prediction markets. Adam, from your point of view as a licensed operator in Arizona, how surprised were you to see Arizona revoke Underdog's license, and how reasonable do you find it given the circumstances?
Not unexpected, considering they literally send out a letter a week saying, do not touch predictions, do not touch predictions, do not touch predictions. For me, it's been way too excessive on their part for how they've been attacking this. I guess, whatever their legislation is, or whoever's pushing these buttons, whatnot, it goes back decades ago, pre-PASPA. Like, how about looking at how you can bring this in to the fold and how you can work with operators, no matter what verticals they're entering and things like that. But it's Underdog. Maybe it's an easy one to pick on because Fanatics released predictions last week, and they've still got their Arizona license. FanDuel and DraftKings are definitely heading into that arena. I mean, I would love nothing more than Arizona to take away DraftKings and FanDuel and Fanatics and all these licenses, and then leave little old Betcris in there, with $400-500 million of volume looking for a home. That'll be the real test. Again, I think underdog's an easy one to pick on. Let's see them actually go to war with the bigger one and see what happens there. But right now, they've shown that they have, a little bit of teeth. Let's see what happens when, with Fanatics, who's already sort of announced that they're in the space. Let's see where their letter is or where their license is coming back to them.
And Joe, building on that, what do you think of the notion that Arizona is creating a precedent by going after underdog for something it doesn't even offer in Arizona, making this tantamount to guilt by association? And by extension, how concerned should licensed operators be about this, as well as the data providers we discussed last week?
Well, Adam kind of came pretty mostly where I was landing on this. I mean, honestly think this looks like a really weak move by Arizona regulators. Nobody ever told you, like, hey, when you go in the joint, when you're walking the yard the first day, find the smallest guy you can, smallest, weakest guy in the yard you can, and kick the shit out of him, right? And that'll intimidate everybody. No, everybody says pick the biggest guy to pick a fight with, to show everybody that you mean business. I don't think any of the licensees in Arizona right now, the big guys, FanDuel, DraftKings, that they're intimidated by this move. Why Jeremy Levine and Little Underdog had to get their license taken away, I don't know. But that's the way they decided to go. Fanatics, much bigger target, would have been a bigger message that they would have sent to the world because they're operating. They have their own dedicated prediction markets app in the store, all of that. If they had taken a shot at them, not that I'm cheering for Arizona regulators to take a shot at Fanatics, but that would have sent a message. This is an incredibly weak message. Now, I mean, the thing is, the precedent, to your question, like, does this establish a precedent? There's already a precedent. Gaming regulators, state gaming regulators have long held that they can not only regulate within their state, have an opinion about how people operate in their state, but they can have an opinion about how you operate elsewhere in other jurisdictions. I think that, okay, that was a long time, solid position for them to be able to defend. It's an incredibly weak position right now, I would say, because of most of gaming is digital right now, at least in the sports betting space, right? So it's so easy for operators to move into other channels or for players to be able to access offshore, gray market, sweeps, you name it. There's just too many alternatives. So this kind of old school attitude of like, we're going to show everybody who's boss around here kind of thing. Like, I get it. Regulators are always in a tough position. They're just in an enforcement position, and they have incredibly weak tools in order to do this. But the reality is like, okay, well, did they just make it easier for Jeremy to double down on prediction markets? All right, he lost his DFS license today in Arizona. All right, well, he wasn't taking prediction market action in Arizona, but maybe he will tomorrow. And maybe that'll be a much bigger business, of which the state of Arizona will get that much. Okay? Regulators, the states, they all have to evolve in their thinking about gaming. And this was just an incredibly weak and backward way of doing it.
From the Grand Canyon State to the Bay State, the Massachusetts Gaming Commission meets this week when it'll be presented with regulation proposals to address account limiting. Adam, what do you expect to see come from this, and what would you consider to be a reasonable starting point?
I don't really expect much from it, and then sort of to implement it and things like that. I think the FanDuels and the DraftKings missed great opportunities to really play to their, the database that they have and say, all right, we're going to be, minimum of 1,000 on the NFL game, side total, money line, first half, quarters, any of those things. I mean, this is just a lot of much ado about nothing with all the regulators on a lot of things, unfortunately. And I've dealt with this limiting thing now must be going on 30 years. And it's kind of comical hearing it around the newly formed US sports betting world that everybody's going through now. It's actually quite fatiguing the way it is. It's all going on. So, I mean, I'll look for the headlines and see what happens and go from there. But yeah, really have become very much disinterested in that conversation in recent times.
Joe, anything to add regarding the Massachusetts Gaming Commission?
I think it's going to be tough for Massachusetts to do anything beyond having like a modest minimum stake level and modest payout level, and make it the best that people I think could hope for is that they turn the triangle upside down, and instead of limiting people down, they create a system where people can be, ratcheted up. So if you're a player who they want to appeal to, now you can potentially get 2x the limits or 3x the limits or something like that. That's about the only place I think that regulators really can go on this one in the U.S. market. But I'd say it was a long shot to expect that to come out on Thursday as well.
And pivoting to a different topic, but sticking with you, Joe. Last week, a new trade association group emerged with 5 fintech and gaming companies teaming up to form the Coalition for Prediction Markets, or CPM, comprised of Kalshi, Crypto.com, Coinbase, Robinhood, and Underdog. What role do you see this group playing in the discourse as the state versus federal debate heats up?
Well, that was the playbook that we used to legalize sports betting. We created a professional association, and the focus of the lobbying effort was through there. And obviously took time, but was successful. I think one of the things that the sports betting industry has suffered from is that they started a professional association kind of late in the cycle after you had already had about 2/3 of the states that legalized. Prior to that, it was primarily the companies lobbying directly themselves. I think that made a goddamn mess of it. So, centralizing your lobbying efforts into one organization certainly helps. It's much easier to speak from one songbook about, what you need to do politically than it is from 5, 6, a dozen different songbooks. It makes it easier for lawmakers and others to be able to understand your message, to get your message. But, it's not a cure-all. You see that right now also, and sometimes you become the locus of everybody's anger, like the association around sweeps sites in the wake of what happened in New York State. There's an awful lot of criticism about that organization, which probably is unfair. I mean, just because you organize doesn't mean organizing means to advances. It just means you're organized. You can still take a beating when the odds are stacked against you. We'll wait and see. A lot of times, professional associations can pop up and just as easily close. I think these guys, though, they're going to have to work a lot harder. And it's probably a recognition that the proselytizing, media-saturated CEOs of the lead companies probably aren't getting the job done, and that now they got to bring in some professional lobbying staff in order to be able to move the needle. Because really, when you look at this, if they aren't able to prevail in the courts against the states, then they are going to have to go to Washington and get federal legislation in order to be able to hang on to sports. And that is not an easy affair.
And Adam, while this topic may be more in Joe's wheelhouse, given the similarities to the blueprint he mentioned to get past the overturns, from your position, what are you watching for, if anything, as the Coalition for Prediction Markets gets off the ground?
I mean, these coalition things, these groups, whatnot, are spoken highly of the AGA. And then in the same article, there was something about, the Sports Betting Alliance, which a former AGA guy is taking over the lead as CEO. I mean, I guess it's just ways to get paid to do, some talking and some lobbying and all that. I mean, that's right in Joe's wheelhouse there.
What, talking and getting paid? Hey, yeah, send your money over here, buddy.
How hard is it just to get this shit organized and look around the world and see where everyone else is fucking it up and where you're just, making a mess of it yourselves? And then just ideally the goal is regulator, oversee it, pull in some taxes from it, change the laws or whatever you need to do within the scope. I mean, it's just to get sort of the highlighted or the motto of the show today. It's very, very tiring and exhausting. Just one speaking over the top of the other one, over the top of the other one, over the top of the other one, in the sense of, again, it's AGA, SBA, this one. I mean, I'm not sure what's happening with the Bettor's Voice, and there was some other ones that popped up as well. It just seems like there's these things being created and no real traction or no real alignment or get together or working out what this is. Everyone's sort of playing their own game within the game and not really actually progressing anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, sadly, that's a legitimate criticism. I mean, you go up and down K Street in Washington, D.C., we're hardly the only industry or special interest that seems to have multiple industry trade associations with incredibly well-paid outside lobbying staff. And, they have great offices and they have, they go to all the best restaurants and they go to all the right meetings and they get all the right speaking engagements. But then when you look at the results, they don't get a whole lot of traction. So it's one of the things where, like when I look at what we were able to do with sports betting, with PASPA and everything like that, a lot of it was hard work and a lot of it was luck and a lot of it was having the right people. We had some really highly motivated, highly committed people. And I think that's probably one of the things that's hardest to recreate. So when you create these professional associations, like, all right, well, who are you staffing it with? Are they true believers? Forgive the term, but partisans? Or are they just like, is it just another gig to them? And it's hard. It's very hard to find people who are willing to really double down and put their heart into this stuff and not just make it, punching a 9-to-5 job. And I think that's the big thing. But you have to start somewhere. And the big thing is to minimize the talking over each other. And frankly, when you've got frenemies, because Polymarket and Kalshi and Crypto.com and all those guys, they're competitors. Are you really going to be able to get them to separate, like bring them together and all enter one meeting without trying to one up the other 4 or something like that? Like, no. So you got to, the frenemies have got to commit to this kind of thing if they want to see a successful campaign. But it's like anything. It all comes down to execution. And, as you can tell from Adam's yawning, execution has not been particularly good over the last 10 years or so. I think Adam is exhausted from Christmas shopping for his enormous family, and just everything this week seems tiring to him.
Well, he's probably not alone in being tired of that topic. It's reminiscent of the saying that taking action doesn't necessarily equate to making progress. But Adam, before any further fatigue sets in, let's take this home talking a different kind of action. In addition to the Bears money you flagged earlier, what's the most noteworthy action you're seeing across Prime Sports and Betcris on NFL Week 16 since hanging openers, as well as any big action on college football playoff and bowl games since we last spoke?
On Sunday's game, the Bills are getting a lot of money, but when I dug into it, a ton of teaser play early, bringing them down to 4, 3.5, and 3 there. Pats, Ravens getting really good money. 61% of the money's on the Patriots. 98% of the master money is on the Ravens. And then again, it's Pats +3, Ravens -2.5. But that's probably one of the biggest bet games of the week so far. Probably the best game of the entire season. Saints, Jets. 96% of the money on the Saints there. Jets are friendless even against the Saints. But the college football is what's interesting. I did notice Mississippi over Tulane. A lot of money on that game. 90% of the money on Mississippi, 96% of the master. The other 3 games, there was 2 college games on the weekend. One of them was Army-Navy. Ton of money coming on Army. Moved from 3 to 7 since the weekend. And then Navy-Cincinnati, ton of money come on Navy. The line was 1 and now 6. So I don't know. I didn't watch that game. It must have been one hell of a game where both teams, fought to the death and showed that they could literally take on anyone that they're going to line up next. But both of those teams have got a ton of money on them and the lines have moved significantly. And then the game we're all talking about from last week, James Madison, Oregon. This is getting insane. There is at least 2.5x money on this game over any other game, including Alabama, Oklahoma, and all these other ones. 87% of the master money is on James Madison, +23, +22, +21.5, +21. When you line all the games up, there is just so much good two-way volume overall on this game. And then the Masters are all over James Madison with 3 touchdowns and a tud on that as well. But yeah, it's starting to get ready. Bowls are starting to come up. We've got NFL Saturday coming this week as well. So bring it on.
By the way, speaking of my James Madison Dukes, if you want to see absolutely the funniest postseason trolling Twitter account right now, JMU Sports is just owning it out there against Oregon. So take a quick peek.
Yeah, it seems like they might be borrowing a page from the Chargers social media playbook with some of the fun they've been having there. And Adam, I bet that the James Madison Oregon note was music to Joe's ears as the president of the Go Dukes fan club on this show. I do need to jump in one more time with a quick follow-up. With all the marquee games on the slate, you mentioned James Madison, Oregon, and the Jets Saints standing out when it comes to activity in college football and the NFL respectively. How would you explain why games like that are captivating the betting market to this degree when there are so many other seemingly more compelling options to choose from?
Well, again, I mean, on the Saints Jets ones, it's recreational money that's come in so far. It's no sharp money's jumping out. I think they're just, locking it in as the play of the week. How Saints don't seem that bad. Jets just seem like they've given up completely. Yeah, I mean, James Madison, friggin', I couldn't even point to where James Madison is on a map. And I'm sure I've bet, their games multiple times over the years. But yeah, I mean, it's surprising because even when I do the Bostonian in the book on a Wednesday, Thursday, and Matt sort of says, this is going to be a big bet game, low volume. And then we get some random game between two scrub teams, and it's huge volume. Like, none of it makes sense. Usually when it comes sort of towards the weekend, standalone games get more volume. Doesn't matter who's playing. And then the marquee games start to get that, business in. But yeah, there's no rhyme or reason where a lot of this money comes in and why it comes on certain teams at certain times of the week. But hey, the games are there to be bet. Take the bets, move the number.
On the behalf of everybody in Harrisonburg, Virginia, home of the James Madison University Dukes, and scrub team, come on, man. These guys are winners. Remember that, the man himself, Kurt Signetti, was the one who built the winning culture there, and he's just left behind the right DNA. Shock the world. They're going to shock the world, baby, because when has Oregon ever won a big game? if you really want to, obviously a 3-touchdown spread on that one has got to be tasty for anybody, regardless. But I think there's a cultural thing towards Oregon. Oregon has never performed when the spotlight was on them. So, why not? I mean, Signetti walked into Oregon this past year with Indiana University and beat those guys up on their home field. So why can't his his former billet of James Madison do the same thing?
I don't know, Joe. I was at Autzen Stadium a couple weeks ago and saw Oregon impose its will against USC in what seemed to be a pretty big game. But I don't know what that says about my alma mater. Maybe that's what the takeaway should be in all of this.
I think that was more of an emotional thing for you. I think it was a pretty crap game for the rest of the world. So anyway.
All right. Well, speaking of crap games, as some may call it, to paraphrase Adam, the Jets may have given up entirely. But to the audience, as we wrap up this week's episode, we appreciate you not giving up on us. Thanks as always for tuning in, and we'll catch you next week.
Wow.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Prime Suspects. Register for Prime Sports at primesports.com and download the Prime Sports app. You can follow us on Twitter at PrimeSuspects_, at Joe Brennan Jr., and at Adam Bjorn 2. You must be 21 or over to play on Prime Sports. Always bet responsibly and within your limits. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER.